the table, the Abolitionist table. I'm Cornelia, and today I'd like to talk about abolishing a word, indoctrination. Today I'd like to talk about something that took me years to accept and embrace as a practice, and that is the journey of unlearning. It's been a world learning. From the time you enter the world to the time you're gone, you're learning. Even when you don't want to learn, you're still learning. So welcome to the table, the Abolitionist table. I'd like to talk to you about, should we abolish this indoctrination? The word is something I never really considered to be applicable to me. I didn't think of how I was learning things as indoctrination. The word is defined as the process of teaching a person or group to accept a set of beliefs uncritically. Uncritically is the key word for me. That means for me, you're not questioning the word. You're not questioning the beliefs that you're being provided. You're not pushing back on things. You're uncritically accepting whatever is taught without even questioning these things, being curious about. You're just accepting them as truth, as fact, as something that, you believe, and taking it into yourself and living by those beliefs. I interpret the word and uncritically myself to mean without challenge. So to be indoctrinated is to accept those beliefs without challenge. And I think a lot of us, at least for me, growing up, a lot of what I believed, I didn't challenge it. I just accepted it. It was the way you were supposed to be. It was the way you were supposed to think. Now, growing up as a child, there's a certain amount of indoctrination experience that I think we all agree about. For instance, I grew up in the country in Mississippi, and there were certain limitations in the country where I grew up. Point of this word that I want to really drive home is the uncritically part, okay? Today, I'd like to talk about something that took me years to accept and embrace as a practice, and that is the journey of unlearning. You spend a world of learning, and then sometimes at some place, you spend a world learning. From the time you enter the world to the time you're gone, you're learning. Even when you don't want to learn, you're still learning. So welcome to the table, the Abolitionist table. I'd like to talk to you about, should we abolish this indoctrination? The word is something I never really considered to be applicable to me. I didn't think of how I was learning things as indoctrination. The word is defined as the process of teaching a person or group to accept a set of beliefs uncritically. Uncritically is the key word for me. That means for me, you're not questioning the word. You're not questioning the beliefs that you're being provided. You're not pushing back on things. You're uncritically accepting whatever is taught without even questioning these things, being curious about. You're just accepting them as truth, as fact, as something that, you believe, and taking it into yourself and living by those beliefs. I interpret the word and uncritically myself to mean without challenge. So to be indoctrinated is to accept those beliefs without challenge. And I think a lot of us, at least for me, growing up, a lot of what I believed, I didn't challenge it. I just accepted it. It was the way you were supposed to be. It was the way you were supposed to think. Now, growing up as a child, there's a certain amount of indoctrination experience that I think we all agree about. For instance, I grew up in the country in Mississippi, and there were certain limitations in the country where I grew up. You know, my childhood came in Mississippi. There were a certain amount of limitations that came with my childhood that just informed me differently than my cousins who grew up in the city or in northern states. In the country, we had 3 television stations: NBC, CBS, and PBS. And on a good day, maybe ABC. So that was the only entertainment I have. Those are the only selections that I was provided. This was before satellites and all that. And then, but if I went in the city, I could get cable. And so things, you know, television shows that I didn't even, like Good Times is something I never got to see until I went somewhere else to see it, because it wasn't provided on those few channels that I had access to. So I accepted that limitation based on my circumstance uncritically. Now, I was not happy about it, but I didn't challenge. Why don't we have it? Just didn't have it. And so I just thought there were no other choices available to me. Likewise, I remember in school, you would have to say the Pledge of Allegiance, and you would have to sing My Country 'Tis of Thee. And I think we did one other thing. And I just accepted that's what you do. That's what you do in school, in elementary school. You do that. And I think they still do some of those practices today. But this was absolutely indoctrination, right? When they prayed in school, not saying it was a bad thing or a good thing, but it was an assumption that everybody prayed to the same God, had the same religion, right? The Pledge of Allegiance was assuming that I was pledging allegiance to this country, and it was an assumption that the loyalty that was being indoctrinated in us, those things were being poured in us without question. Nobody questioned the Pledge of Allegiance. Nobody questioned those songs. But as you grow up and you grow older, you start to review history, and you review the origin of those lyrics and the writers that penned those songs. And ironically, a lot of those things did not have me in mind, and did not feel like the best thing for me was part of it. So yeah, so what I've learned to do is to change that, to be critical, to challenge everything that comes before me. When I started my journey of unlearning, I wanted to abolish this. Indoctrination was something I just did not and have not and aren't accepting anymore. So I was on a journey and am on a journey that if something is brought to me, I don't care if it's a clickbait on social media, if it's a news story on mainstream media, if it's on YouTube, whatever is brought to me, I feel compelled, and have for the last 15 years or so, to find out if it's true. Find out the context around it. Not just take for granted that what's being fed to me is right, is fact, is truth, is honoring me, is honoring my people, is honoring humanity. So I question everything now. So, and that I have learned is a daily practice. It's not something that I can just put down. I've learned that I am fiercely loyal to not being indoctrinated. I'm fiercely loyal to learning and unlearning every single day. And I say it's a daily practice because it's very easy. It's very easy to fall back into that slump and just be fed information. It's really almost automatic that you would just say, surely that got to be true, right? So I am dedicated and duty bound to unlearning and the practice of unlearning every single day. And I want to say that again, every single day. Why every day? Because it requires a daily choice and desire to continue to be critical, ask questions, and demand the truth. Nothing but the whole truth will, with all the data introduced, with all the facts provided. Because what I've learned is if you don't fight for it, fight for understanding what the truth is, for the facts, you'll be swayed back into this lullaby of whatever's being fed to you is the truth. Yeah, so I'm not going to be compromised again with this. One of the things that has given me this desire and this practice on an ongoing basis is really just looking at history. Really just looking at history. Because what I've learned is being indoctrinated is the status quo. It is the norm. It is what everybody does. Because learning and fighting to learn and to understand and to be critical is abnormal to some degree. It is not normal to question everything. As you get older, as you have a family, it just is the norm to just accept what people are giving you. And once you kind of taste the other side of learning that, oh, this is the truth. Oh, and that's not true. Oh, and that's not true. Then it really becomes this butterfly effect of continuously wanting to question, well, wait a minute, all the time. I'm always like, well, wait a minute. Let me ask that question. Well, why did that happen? And who did that happen to? And who said that? And why did they say that? And why were they in that circumstance? It can be an endless, overwhelming at times, rabbit hole to go down. But I am fiercely unwilling to be compromised anymore. And what I learned, like I said, in history, one of the things that I read on a regular basis is the slave narratives. The slave narratives, I'm not sure if everybody knows, but in the 1930s, during the Great Depression, there was a project that was given to artists and singers and people in the artsy creative community. They all didn't have jobs. And so as a mechanism to employ people, the federal government, this would be called a bailout. The federal government employed these people to just go and capture history, capture real life stories from all different types of walks of life here in the United States. And one of those sections of people were former slaves. And so the slave narratives is written word, interviews that you can hear because they have recordings of them. But they also are written in the same dialect that the people were speaking. And this was, like I said, 1930. So that's almost 75 years after emancipation, right? So when I first discovered these stories, there's a book I read that someone took, and there's a book I read that was a slave narrative, was about the slave narratives, and they took the dialect and they made it more palatable for just reading consumption without the dialect, and just kind of told some of the stories in maybe more modern words. And from that, I said, I need to find more. But they all got these from this library, this federal writers project. And it was interesting because they have narratives from various enslaved people from all the states that where slavery was prominent. So they have it from Mississippi, Tennessee, Alabama, all the southern states. So you can go in and find a state and find interviews from former enslaved people. And I'd like to keep saying this. It was 75 years, almost 75 years after emancipation that these interviews had taken place. And one of the things that they gave the interviewers kind of free rein to ask a certain set of questions. And there were like two different sets of questions of how they would interview the people. And one of the kind of lines, suggestions to interviews, and to the interviewers, they would ask the ex-slaves, the formerly enslaved people, they would ask them, what did they expect from freedom? They would ask them, what did they get at freedom? They would ask them, where did they go after the war? Did they know of any secret organizations? They always asked them about the Ku Klux Klan. They asked them if they ever voted. Had they ever held office? They would ask them about, what kind of clothes they wore and what kind of food they ate, and what kind of jobs they had. They would ask them about how they felt about the younger generation. They also would ask them about if they had known any slave uprisings. They asked them about songs that they knew. They would ask them about folklore or any type of, if they had seen, shooting stars or things like that. And then they also would always ask them, what did they think about Black people and white people marrying or in relationship? It's interesting. It was quite interesting. So, those were some of the things that they asked the question of. And so I wanted to read a couple of these because these are our ancestors and these are their words and their experiences. So let's read a couple of them. And once again, this is, 75 years, 75 years past the time. So this was, I chose the block of Tennessee. This was Miss Frances Batson. And they talked about they gave her address of where she lived at the time. And so I'm going to read in her dialect. So that's going to be challenging, but I'm going to do my best. So they're interviewing her and she says she doesn't know how old she is. And so that was one of the first things that I noticed. Some of them would say, I think I'm 84. I think I'm 90. I think I'm 120. And if you read Frederick Douglass' autobiography, that was one of the first things he said in his book. He said he wished he knew how old he was. He figured he was about this age. But that was one of the basic things that as an enslaved person, you wouldn't have. You wouldn't know when you were born. You wouldn't know your birth date. And so that was probably a general consistent thing that I have seen as I've read these narratives, because I've read them all and I continuously go back to read. But she said she didn't know how old she was. She was born in Nashville during slavery. She must be about past 90, as far as she can remember. The Yankee soldiers, she remembered the Yankee soldiers well. The Chillins called him the Blue Mans. Now hear what she says. My white folks was named Crockett. Dr. Crockett was our master, but I don't remember him. I don't remember the missus. He died when I was small. My master was mean to my mammy. With her older children would run away. My older brother went to the war with my master. And so during wartime, they would take sometimes enslaved people with them, and they were called bond servants. So the weirdest thing in the world is, during the Civil War, they would take a slave with them to wait on them, to butler for them, to do whatever they needed to have done for them. And it was, one of the most cruel things for me, because they are working, the enslaved person would be working in conjunction with someone against themselves, against their own freedom. And of course, they didn't, have any means of understanding that. But a lot of them I've read ran away, during that time. They escaped to freedom during these times when they would take them to slavery. When they would take them to war with them. My younger brother ran away. They caught him and they took him home and whipped him. He ran away and then he ran away again, and then he was never found. We wasn't sold, but my mammy went away and she left him, and I got up one morning, went to my mammy's room, and she was gone. I cried and cried for her, and my missus wouldn't let me outside the house for fear I would try to find her. After freedom, my brother and Yankee soldier come in a wagon to get us. My white folks said, I don't see why you is talking to these children. My brother said, we is free now. I remember one whipping my missus give me. Me and her daughter slipped away to the river to fish. We caught a fish, and my missus had cooked it for us, but she whooped us for going to the river. The Buena Vista schools is hit by the Yankee soldiers' barrack. Either morning day had music. We children would go on the hill, water bag meals is now, and listen to them. I remember a black horse the soldiers had, that if you called him Jefferson Davis, he would run to you. I remember the old well on Cedar Creek near the Capitol, and 6 mules fell in it. That was back when blackberries was growing on Capitol Hill. In Morgan Park, we was the pleasure garden, and it was full of Yankee soldiers. After the war, there were so many German people over here that from Jefferson Street to Clay Street was called Dutchtown. I wasn't born when the stars fell. We didn't get nothing when we was freed. Don't know much about the Ku Klux Klan. My mammy used to tell me how the white folks would hire the slaves out to make money for the master and she told me some of the masters would hire the slaves to keep the Yankees from getting them. I don't believe in white and black marriages. My sister married a light man. I wouldn't marry one of them. It would turn me to gold. Don't know nothing about voting. All us, though, that was for the men. That's for the men. I can't think of any tales of nothing about ghosts, except one about a master tying a nigger to the fence, and he was beating him. And a Yankee come along and made him untie the nigger, and then the nigger beat the white man. These young people is tough. I think half of them be hung the way they throw rocks at old people. That's why I'm crippled now. A white boy hit me with a rock. I belong to the Methodist Church. Since freedom, I was hired out, washed, and cooked for different people. The only song I remember is some Hark from the Ground, a Mournful Sound. And that was Miss Frances. Miss Frances Batson was giving the interview, and I just want you to notice what she was saying. One of the things she said, and it was almost 75 years after emancipation, and she was still referring to them as her white folk. 75 years. And she was still saying, my master, my missus. Almost 75 years. She was still talking about her enslavement, being treated as property, as normal circumstance. That is indoctrination. The unlearning had not even begun for her. And she was almost 90 years old. So when I say unlearning is a daily practice, it's a daily practice. Our ancestors were feet away from a life of enslavement. Half a century or more. And they still had the same mentality. They still felt the same way. They still referred to people the same way. They didn't call them by their name. They called them my white folk. They didn't call them Mr. So-and-so. They called them Master and Mrs. The unlearning was not just a daily practice. And so like I know that they had not unlearned and they were indoctrinated, that makes me more fiercely want to hold on to unlearning myself, because I can choose to. I have the ability to be educated. I have the ability to read these books. I have the ability to Google things, to interview people. I have so much more ability and resources to be able to get myself equipped to know the truth. So there's no excuse for me. The indoctrination is not something that I just have to sit and be okay with. Unlearning is my duty. Unlearning is my right. It's an honor to unlearn. It's an honor to abolish the indoctrination that has had me and us as a people bound by lies, by not knowing, by not having the knowledge of ourselves, of our own history. So, that's one of the things that I am loyal to. Abolishing indoctrination is something that I believe fiercely about. Like I said, these interviews happened almost 75 years after emancipation. They had experienced indoctrination in the most intimate and controlled terms. That is learned and ingrained and accepted posture for our ancestors. They exhibited this, but they survived doing so. And so they survived for us to be able to understand their story. But they didn't just survive for that. They survived and extended themselves and passed the baton to us so we can do more than just survive. They survived so that we could take off those clothes of indoctrination and learn for ourselves, about ourselves. Learn about them. Learn about their stories. So when I hear our ancestors and Miss Frances talking about my white folk, it kind of reminds me of how strategic the South was with their indoctrination for ourselves and for their people. And one of those groups that did that was called the United Daughters of Confederacy. And they would refer to us, our ancestors, as children. So I'd like to read you a little excerpt from the United Daughters of Confederacy, because they are the people that were responsible for keeping the lost cause alive. Because, of course, the Confederacy believed they lost the war, but they won the battle. The Confederacy believes they lost the war, but they won the battle. And they continue to win the battle. And how do they do that? Indoctrination. So what they would do is they would celebrate all the Confederate soldiers, their birthdays, they would celebrate with them when they passed away. They would erect statues all over the United States, not just in the South, all over the United States. They would name streets after soldiers. So they would name buildings after Confederate generals. There's not a place in the United States, not many places, that aren't touched by the strategic workings of the United Daughters of Confederacy. That is an indoctrination that you don't even know exists around you. And that's one of the things that I have learned as I've sought the truth. There's so many streets out here that if I just do a little research, I have learned that they are named for Confederate soldiers, for Confederate families, for Confederate battles, for old mansions, for plantations. It's all around us. It's all around us. It's in the emblems they put on our county crest. They were very strategic. It was subtle, but they knew what they were doing. It was surrounding a people group with all the things to remind them who they were and who they didn't believe they were. Who they were and who they weren't, at least from their interpretation. So here's something they wrote. And this is under the civilization of the Old South. It said, very different was the relation that existed between the slaveholder and his slaves under the institution of slavery. And it was in the Old South. By the way, the Negroes in the South were never called slaves. But that term came in with the abolition crusade. They were our servants, part of our very house, and always alluded to us. They were always alluded to as the servants of a given plantation of a home, as the servants of White Marsh, the servants of Weiner Hall, the servants of Roswell or Roswell, or Halcott, the servants of Cherry Hill, the servants of Round Hill, of Silver Hill, etc. The servants had no surnames of their own before the war. They had none when they came to us from Africa. Do you hear what they said? When they came to us, as if they voluntarily came over from Africa. But they were known by the names of their owners and their owners' estates. Thus, it was that Nancy from the Thornton plantation after freedom became Nancy Thornton, and Tom from Warner Hall became Tom Warner. There was something in the economic system of the Old South that forged bonds of personal interest and affection between the master's family and their servants. A pride that was taken in one and the other. The master would boast, my servants are the best on all the plantations round. Best workers, best mannered, best continent, best mannered, the healthiest. And the servants in turn would say, our white folks are quality folks. They're none of your poor white trash. Ain't nobody in the world like our old master and old miss. The Negroes under the institution of slavery were well fed, well clothed, and well housed. A selfish interest, if no nobler of higher motive, would have necessitated this, for the slave was the master's salable property. He would not willingly have allowed him to be injured physically. How hard it was for it to make the North understand this. I never heard of a case of consumption, or rather tuberculosis, among the Negroes before the war between the states, and now Negroes are dying by the hundreds yearly. I never heard of anybody going crazy before the war. Now asylums can't be built fast enough to contain those who lose their minds. Negroes were immune from yellow fever before the war, and now that is no longer true. They never saw a drunken Negro before the war, for they were not allowed to buy, sell, or drink liquor without the master's consent. And crimes, now so prevalent largely on account of drunkenness, were unheard of then. They were forced to go to church, and white pastors employed to preach to them. They were not allowed to work on Sunday. They were not allowed to work on Sunday. In proportion to population, there were more Negroes and church members than whites. The servants were very happy in their life upon the old plantations. Williams makes peace, Thackeray on a lecture tour in the Americas, visit a southern plantation in roundabout papers, and he gives the impression of the slaves. How they sang, how they danced, how they laughed, how they shouted, how they bowed and scraped and complimented, so free, so happy. I saw them dressed on Sunday in their Sunday best, for far better dressed than our English tenants of the working class are in the holiday attire. To me, it is the dearest institution I have never, ever seen. And these slaves seem far better off than any tenants I have seen under any other tenant system. When a white child was born, a Negro corresponding age was given. This Negro called the white child as much as the white child owned. This Negro owned the white child as much as the white child owned the Negro. The Negro refused to take an order from any young person, save the owner, and the owner refused to have any order given by any other but the owner. How restful a life this old life was. What a picture of contentment, peace, and happiness it presented. It was something like our grandmother's garden as compared with the gardens of today. This is what the Daughters of Confederacy painted enslavement as. Doesn't it harken back to Gone with the Wind? It was just an institution. It was not a bad thing. They were better off. They were like our children. We treated them so well. This is what was thought of. And this institution, this genocide, this Holocaust of a people group, is what they called a family. They were part of our family. They were part of our way of life. So that I just wanted to kind of show the comparison there, and how deep and how dark and how dedicated indoctrination is. And as deep and as dark and as dedicated as indoctrination is, it's just as fiercely, I am just as fiercely dedicated to abolishing it in my life and those around me. I am dedicated to unlearning. And it is a constant practice. It is a daily thing. I cannot afford to go back, to slip back into the world where I compromise myself for proximity to the historical oppressor. I just can't. I can't afford to just act like everything was okay. Now, I'm not dwelling. I'm not wallowing in anything. I'm just trying to understand the truth. And that's uncomfortable for other people. Sometimes for me, but for the most part, it's uncomfortable for other people. But ain't nothing wrong with the truth, even if it's uncomfortable. But this is why I seek and read history most days. This is why I have the autobiography. This is why I have the autobiography of Frederick Douglass and the Souls of Black Folks on repeat monthly in my ears. Because I need to be able to be reminded on a regular basis to fight fiercely for unlearning. I need to be reminded in a time like now. This is not new. This experience we're going through is not new. But the second hand of time has just brought it back in cycle to revisit us, to see if we are prepared. And the challenging part is, I don't think a lot of us are prepared. I think we all were, I think many of us were in this lullaby of thinking everything was okay. Unlearning requires us to think critically at all times and not acquiesce to the old soundtrack of familiarity. I cannot afford to have 75 years extra for my eyes to be opened again and again and again. I don't have that time. I don't have that time to just act like everything is going to be okay. To act like, oh no, that wasn't so bad. To act like, oh, I didn't know that. And now I do. And so maybe I'm not going to fight for understanding if there's something else I didn't know. Every day I have to question things I thought I knew and I didn't. Every day I have to be able to not compromise my curiosity and pushing back and challenging what's being told to me, taught to me, said to me. I have to push back. It's my duty to unlearn. It's my duty to abolish indoctrination, to embody what I need to learn for myself. And now I implore you to do the same. It's not easy. It's not difficult either. It's really just making a choice. What am I going to fiercely understand and be obligated to learn today? And what am I going to be willing to unlearn? What am I going to be willing to push back against? Because there's so many messages coming at us. We got the news, we got the internet, we got radio, we got so many competing media and messages and information and data coming at us all the time. How do you decipher and disseminate what's right and what's wrong? Well, you don't have to do it all in one breath. But you do have to say, stop, hold on, take that in, process that, research that, see if that's true, to move forward. Because there are spirits, there is a tug of war going on constantly for the messaging. Are you going to lose the battle and just give up and say, no, I'm just going to figure out what they got to be telling me the truth. Surely they know what's best for me. Oh no, they are telling me what's true. They know what's best for me. How about we find out what's best for ourselves? How about we question and challenge and push back and figure that out for ourselves? That's what unlearning is. That's what abolishing indoctrination is. It's about being willing and courageous enough to say, I need to know for myself what's best for me. Let me arm myself with information. Let me ask the questions. Let me read some. Let me go interview some places, some people. Let me interview some people. Let me go some places. Let me ask the uncomfortable things. That's one of the things that we have to, I think we have to crave and desire the truth. To be informed, to know more, to do better, to know better, to do better. I think we owe that to our ancestors like Francis. I think we owe that to them. I think if they had the opportunity to know that there was real I think if they had the opportunity that we have today, they would do something different than what we're doing today. I don't think that they would want us to be doing the same things that they were doing hundreds of years ago. I don't think that they would. I think they would expect an evolution of us. They survived so that we can have an opportunity to do something different. What are you doing different? What are you questioning? Are you just going to hear what the right side is saying and the left side has been talking to me the whole time and they've just used me and they hadn't paid attention to me, so now I'm going to talk to the right side and now the right side is better than the left side? No. I think that's all a waste of time. We have the power to make that determination. What's best for us. And it might be some on the right. And it might be some on the left. And it might be neither. That's the truth of it all. It might be something entirely new. And that's okay. But we have to be willing. We have to be willing to step into that uncomfortable place. Find out what we need to find out. Gather the data, get the facts, get the information, unlearn, and do something different for us. So that when they record our interviews, we won't sound like Francis. I think it'd be a dishonor to our ancestors to stay in the same place when they died for us to do something different, to be here, to represent, to do something better. So here we go. Let's abolish this. Let's start unlearning. Let's start learning. Let's start challenging. Let's push back. Let's figure out what we need for ourselves. I have enjoyed this conversation. And again, we are the ones we've been waiting for, guys. Let's start unlearning. Until the next time, thank you for joining the table.